What would you do if the person responsible for saving your life decided your pain wasn't worth the trouble? Lisa thought she was stepping into a hospital for help, only to find herself battling not just the agony of childbirth, but the cold indifference of a nurse who had already decided she wasn't worth listening to. If you've ever wondered how far healthcare bias can go, this story will leave your blood boiling. Karen, the nurse, had no idea who Lisa's husband really was. She thought she could dismiss their pleas, ignore the warning signs, and get away with it, like she'd done with so many others. But what happens when the man standing by Lisa's side knows more about medicine than she thinks? And what if a secret from the past comes crashing through the hospital doors, flipping everything on its head just when things are about to go tragically wrong? This is a story about what happens when the system fails, but also what it looks like when people fight back. If you're tired of seeing injustice brushed under the rug, stick with us. The truth behind this ordeal is more twisted than you think. And the fallout? It's about to be explosive. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because stories like this need to be told, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. It was the kind of night that makes time feel slower. Lisa sat on the worn-out couch, gripping Marcus's hand as another contraction tore through her. Her breath hitched, a mix of excitement and dread flickering in her eyes. "It's happening," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Marcus, though trying to stay calm, could feel his pulse quicken. This was the moment they had been counting down to, but there was no escaping the underlying fear. Money was tight, and being a black couple with limited resources meant they knew the odds weren't in their favor. Yet, Marcus tightened his grip, silently telling her, "We got this." Marcus, once a medical student with dreams of becoming a doctor, wasn't the same man he thought he'd be. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs, and when his mother's illness demanded every bit of care and financial support, Marcus walked away from school. He never told Lisa how much that decision still haunted him. "We'll be okay," he assured her, though the weight in his voice made it clear. He was convincing himself as much as her. In moments like these, the ghosts of lost dreams tend to sneak up, whispering what could have been. "Let's get to the hospital before things ramp up," Marcus said, reaching for the overnight bag they'd carefully packed weeks ago. Lisa stood slowly, her body already speaking the language of labor. Every step felt deliberate, as if she was crossing some invisible threshold between who she had been and the mother she was about to become. Marcus stayed close, slipping into the role he had always known best. Protector. They were ready. They had to be. In the cab ride to the hospital, Lisa clenched Marcus's arm, a mixture of anxiety and excitement bubbling between them. "What if—" she started, but Marcus cut her off gently. "No what ifs. We're doing this." His tone was firm, but inside, he wrestled with the what ifs she couldn't say aloud. Being poor and black in a healthcare system that often turned its back on families like theirs weighed heavily on them both. The closer they got to the hospital, the heavier the unspoken truths hung in the air, but there was no room for doubt now. They had already come too far. When they arrived at the hospital, Lisa's contractions had started coming hard and fast, each wave stronger than the last. Marcus guided her through the entrance, his hand pressed firmly on her lower back for support. But as soon as they reached the labor and delivery desk, the vibe shifted. There stood Nurse Karen, a tall, middle-aged woman with sharp features and an expression that screamed, "I've seen it all before." "Just another labor," she muttered under her breath as she glanced at Lisa's chart. Marcus caught the dismissive tone and his jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. For now. "Go ahead and change into this," Karen said without looking up, tossing a hospital gown on the bed as if it were an afterthought. Lisa eased onto the mattress, biting her lip to hold back a groan. "The pain! It's worse than I thought," Lisa whispered, her eyes locking onto Marcus's. Karen rolled her eyes. "It's labor. What did you expect? Everyone thinks it's worse than it is." The words landed like a slap. making Lisa feel small in a moment where she needed anything but. Marcus clenched his fists. He'd seen this before. Dismissive treatment dressed up as standard protocol, especially when it came to black patients. Karen busied herself with the paperwork, ignoring the way Lisa's body trembled with each contraction. Marcus, ever the observer, noticed it too. The subtle ways Karen's demeanor hardened, how she avoided eye contact with Lisa. His mind raced back to lectures from medical school, where systemic bias wasn't something they explicitly taught, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. The subtle dismissals, the way black women's pain was often minimized. It was textbook. He knew this could go south fast if they weren't careful, and he wasn't about to let that happen. "Look, my wife needs more than just textbook care," Marcus said, his voice measured but laced with warning. Karen gave him a tight-lipped smile that barely concealed her annoyance. "We'll keep an eye on her. There's nothing unusual here." Lisa shifted, her face twisting in pain. But Karen simply sighed, as if she had better things to do. Marcus could feel the anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. If he blew up now, they'd just label him as another angry black man. He had to be smart, calculated. The night was far from over, and something told him Karen wasn't done testing their patience just yet. Lisa's breathing became shallow as the contractions ripped through her body with relentless force, far worse than anything she'd read or imagined. "Marcus!" she whimpered, gripping his hand as if it were her lifeline. Something was off. She knew it deep down. This wasn't just labor pain. It felt like her body was warning her. Marcus could see it too, the way her complexion shifted from flushed to pale, and how her breath came in panicked bursts. "This isn't right," Lisa gasped. Marcus felt a knot twist in his gut. His instincts, sharpened by years of unfinished medical training, screamed that they needed help. Now. He rushed to Karen, standing at the doorway with her arms folded, scrolling through her phone. "Something's wrong. Her pain isn't normal," Marcus said, trying to stay composed, but feeling the edges of his patience fray. Karen barely glanced at him. "It's labor. It's always worse in their heads," she replied, waving him off like an annoying child. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. Their heads? The phrase hung heavy between them, loaded with unspoken prejudice. He could feel the weight of every news article he'd ever read about maternal mortality rates for black women. This was exactly the nightmare they had feared. "Listen, I've studied this stuff. I know when something's not right." Marcus's voice rose, his desperation spilling out. Karen gave him a look, half condescending, half bored, and shook her head. "Everyone thinks they're a doctor these days," she muttered under her breath. Lisa groaned again from the bed, her back arching in pain. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they were running out of time, and if they didn't act soon, this could turn into an emergency. Fast. He wasn't going to let them lose everything tonight. He rushed back to Lisa, wiping the sweat from her brow and murmuring, "Stay with me, baby. I'm not letting them brush us off." Lisa nodded weakly, though her eyes fluttered with exhaustion. As Marcus stroked her hand, he could feel the tension building inside him, ready to explode. Karen's cold indifference was more than just frustrating. It was dangerous. Every second that ticked by was a second closer to something irreversible. Marcus knew he needed someone who would listen, someone who wouldn't dismiss them. But he also knew that breaking through this wall of ignorance was going to take everything he had left. And Lisa, she couldn't wait much longer. Lisa's body shook uncontrollably now, her breathing shallow as if each breath was a battle in itself. Panic flashed across her face, and Marcus knew she was slipping into the kind of pain that no woman should endure alone, especially not with indifference surrounding her. He scanned the room frantically, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then, by sheer luck, or perhaps fate, another nurse entered. Her name tag read Emily, and something about the way she moved told Marcus she wasn't just going to stand by. She took one look at Lisa and knew this wasn't right. "Her vitals are dropping. We need to move fast," Emily said, her voice firm but calm as she placed a reassuring hand on Lisa's shoulder. Karen scoffed from the corner. "She's just overreacting. First-time mothers always do." Emily shot her a sharp glance, her jaw tight with unspoken anger. "Overreacting?" she repeated, disbelief heavy in her voice. "This isn't a textbook case. Something's wrong." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Finally, someone who saw what he saw. But Karen wasn't backing down. "I've seen worse. She'll be fine." Marcus couldn't hold it in anymore. He stepped forward, his voice filled with barely restrained fury. "Fine? You think this is fine? Look at her!" His words echoed in the room, cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Emily didn't hesitate. She reached for the call button and paged the attending physician. Karen rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed at the disruption. "You're making a scene," she muttered under her breath. Marcus ignored her, standing protectively by Lisa's side, as if sheer willpower alone could keep her safe. Every second stretched like an eternity, but he knew help was on the way. The door swung open, and in strode Dr. Michael Williams, the hospital director himself, still wearing his scrubs from a surgery earlier that night. Marcus's breath hitched. "Michael?" The man standing before him was more than just a doctor. He was the friend Marcus once studied with, the one who had believed in him when Marcus dreamed of becoming a doctor himself. Time slowed as their eyes met, 1,000 unsaid words passing between them in an instant. Marcus could see the moment Michael recognized him, and without hesitation, Michael took charge. "Let's get her to surgery now," he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. And just like that, the tide began to turn. Michael didn't waste a second. He barked orders to the staff, immediately transforming the chaotic room into a synchronized machine. "Prep her for an emergency C-section now," he commanded, his voice steady but urgent. Karen tried to interject. "It's just a normal." But Michael cut her off with a sharp glare. "Enough! Step aside. You've done enough damage." His words landed like a hammer, silencing the room. Marcus couldn't suppress the flicker of satisfaction that crossed his face. Finally, someone with authority was standing up for them. Lisa's hand trembled in Marcus's, but there was a new glimmer of hope in her exhausted eyes. "Marcus, he knows what he's doing?" she whispered, fighting through the pain. Marcus leaned close, brushing his lips against her forehead. "Yes, baby, he knows. We're in good hands now." Michael shot Marcus a reassuring glance across the room, as if silently promising, "I've got you, brother." It was surreal. Two friends, once full of dreams in medical school, now reunited in a hospital under these strange, high-stakes circumstances. Life had come full circle, but neither of them had imagined it would be like this. The surgical team worked with precision as Michael prepared for the procedure. "I'm going to take care of you, Lisa," he said gently, making sure she knew she wasn't just another patient. In a world that often dismissed women like her, this simple acknowledgement felt profound. "You're strong. We'll get through this." His words, though professional, carried the warmth of someone who truly cared. Marcus stayed by her side, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and relief. He wanted to believe Michael's promise, but the weight of what they had been through still lingered heavily on his mind. Minutes later, the sharp cries of their baby girl filled the room, slicing through the tension like sunlight after a storm. Lisa sobbed with joy, and Marcus's knees nearly gave out from the overwhelming relief. "She's here," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. He cradled his newborn daughter in his arms, marveling at her tiny, perfect form. Michael smiled as he stitched Lisa up, his hands steady and sure. "She's beautiful," he said warmly. Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and exhaustion settle over him. For the first time in what felt like hours, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. But in the back of his mind, one question remained. What if Michael hadn't shown up in time? The story wasn't over yet. The room felt lighter, as if all the fear and tension that had gripped them moments before evaporated with the sound of their daughter's first cry. Lisa collapsed back onto the bed, tears spilling freely as the overwhelming relief washed over her. "She's here, Marcus," Lisa whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of exhaustion and joy. Marcus cradled the tiny newborn, her delicate body wrapped snugly in a hospital blanket. "Look at her, Lisa. She's perfect," he whispered, his voice trembling. For a moment, the world outside that room didn't exist. It was just the three of them, together at last. Lisa reached out, her hands still shaking from the intensity of labor, and touched her daughter's cheek. The baby cooed softly, her little face scrunching in the way only newborns can. Lisa's heart ached with a kind of love she hadn't known was possible. "Hi, baby girl," she murmured, brushing away her own tears with a laugh. Marcus leaned in, their foreheads touching as they stared at their daughter in wonder. "She's everything, isn't she?" Lisa nodded, knowing that despite all the fear and pain they had endured, this tiny life made it all worth it. But beneath the joy, the weight of what they had just gone through still hung heavily in the air. Lisa couldn't shake the memory of Karen's cold dismissal, the way her cries for help had been ignored until it was nearly too late. Marcus felt it too. Every second of neglect from Karen haunted him, knowing how close they had come to losing everything. He held his daughter a little tighter, silently vowing that no one would ever treat his family that way again. This baby, their baby, deserved a world that wouldn't dismiss her, the way Karen had dismissed Lisa. Michael entered the room again, checking on Lisa's recovery. He gave them a warm smile. "She's strong, just like her parents," he said softly. Marcus nodded in appreciation, but the unspoken weight between the two friends remained. What almost happened here could have been a tragedy. Lisa and Marcus knew this moment. This victory was hard won, but the battle wasn't over. There were still questions left unanswered, conversations to be had, and changes to be made. The joy of their daughter's arrival was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would have to confront the demons of that night head-on. Later that evening, when things had settled and Lisa and the baby were finally resting, Marcus found himself alone in the hallway with Michael. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and frustration mingling in his expression. "If you hadn't shown up, Mike..." Marcus didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew how close things had come to a disaster. Michael shook his head, his face darkening with anger. "Karen," he began, rubbing his temples. "She almost cost you everything." Marcus nodded, the weight of the night pressing down on him. "And it's not just us," he said bitterly. "This isn't new. How many others didn't get a second chance? How many didn't have someone like you to step in?" His voice cracked with the kind of rage that had nowhere to go. Michael knew he was right. He'd heard whispers from other staff, complaints brushed under the rug. Karen's negligence wasn't a one-off event. It was part of something far bigger. "I've seen it too many times, Marcus," Michael admitted quietly. "And I'll be damned if I let it happen again." In that moment, Michael made a decision. His jaw clenched with resolve as he looked Marcus in the eye. "She's gone," he said firmly. "I'll fire her myself. Tonight." Marcus felt a flicker of relief, but he knew firing Karen was only the first step. "It's not just Karen," Marcus said, shaking his head. "The whole system. It's built like this. People like Lisa, like us, we get dismissed, and it costs lives." Michael nodded solemnly, understanding that the fight ahead wasn't going to be easy. But he also knew it was a fight he couldn't avoid anymore. Before they parted ways, Michael placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You gave up too much for your family," he said gently. "I know it wasn't fair, but maybe it's not too late. Finish what you started. I'll help you. Whatever it takes, we'll make it happen. The offer hit Marcus like a lifeline. The dream of becoming a doctor had always felt out of reach, a casualty of life's unforgiving demands. But standing there, holding his friend's promise in the air between them, Marcus felt something stir inside him. A glimmer of hope, fragile but real. The hospital might have tried to dismiss them, but they weren't walking away empty-handed. That night, as Marcus and Lisa cradled their newborn daughter, they knew their journey was far from over. They had allies now, Michael, each other, and, most importantly, a future to fight for. And though the road ahead would be long, they had already survived the worst of it. With their daughter nestled safely in their arms, they knew they were ready to begin again, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to let anyone stand in their way. The truth is, what happened to Lisa and Marcus isn't just their story. It's the story of so many families fighting to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity in a system that too often looks the other way. The reality is harsh. Racial bias in healthcare isn't a glitch. It's a feature that's been costing lives for far too long. But stories like theirs remind us that change is possible. It takes courage to stand up, persistence to push back, and sometimes a little luck, like reconnecting with the right person at the right time. What would you have done in Marcus's shoes? How would you have reacted if someone's indifference put the people you love most in danger? The fact that this family walked out of that hospital with their daughter safely in their arms feels like a victory. But it's also a stark reminder that too many don't get the same chance. So what do we do now? We talk about it, we confront it, and we demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who might one day find themselves in a similar position. If this story hit a nerve, drop a comment below, and let's get a conversation going. Ever experienced bias in a hospital? How did you handle it? We want to hear your voice. And hey, if this story moved you, if you're fired up and ready to hear more stories that pull back the curtain on uncomfortable truths, subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell. There's more to uncover, more to discuss, and together, we can push for a future where stories like this become the exception, not the rule. See you in the next one.